I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today, we're looking at the second chapter. Last chapter, 15, was a very important chapter because it entered the question of virtues and vices, things to be praised for and blamed for. He gave us the categories of examination of the qualities of the prince. Now, my old teacher, Leo Paul de Alvarez, in his little book, I have it here someplace. I'm a little tired. Um, Actually, look, he's heat stroked. Yeah, I got clobbered last 2 days with heat stroke, and so I'm a little out of it. Still, not really there. But De Alvarez argued that this was the third section. Now he divided the prince into four kind of plots. I'm going to do a special video on this, highlighting De Alvarez's book, because I think De Alvarez does a very good job explaining how the prince organized into kind of four parts. The first part, which we covered mostly, the first two parts we covered, chapters, 1 through 11, which on Principates. That's really the first little book that he did on Principatus, right? That's really the on Principatus. He talks about the different types of Principates. And then starting in 12, 13, and 14, we did the question of arms. And now at chapter 15, he started the question of equality. Now, today in chapter 16, he's going to be dealing with a question. And it focuses on the title of this, de liberalness et parsimoniae. Now, parsimoniae means a parsimony. It means being stingy. Now, stinginess is not, he doesn't list parsimoniae in the list of things to quality. Rather, he uses the Italian words. Let's go back. Let's look at it for a second because it does help us to understand this. That weird word that he uses. Okay, that's too far. The virtual. Okay, hold on. Okay, it's just that weird thing, right? He goes, this wonderful thing. He uses this line here, misero, because Avril doesn't deal with this. He uses the word misero. It doesn't misero, right? The Tuscan word misero, which is stingy. This is how we get parsimony from. This is the equivalent of parsimony. He doesn't specifically explicit parsimony in it, but in fact, he doesn't. He wants to separate it from rapine, because rapine is rapaciousness, right? Rapaciousness. He doesn't want to treat it separately. I think this is an interesting point here for that point of view. Now, why am I today's topic? Liberality and parsimoniousness. These are the two claims. These are a virtue, and what is these two things? A virtue and sometimes vice. Parsimony. Is parsimony a virtue also? Because we would say, but stinginess. See, if you use the Italian or the Tuscan word and said it like that, we would concede maybe the negative because it's perceived in the original criteria as a negative, where liberality is perceived as a virtue. Right? In fact, liberality is a huge virtue. Beneficence. Where is my? Oh yeah, right here. I have it right here. This is Seneca's monster full of Seneca's monster book on benefits, right? Where this is, University of Chicago edition. Now, this is the classic defense of beneficence, doing good, giving gifts, giving charity. This is tied to charity, right? This is tied to the idea of charity. And the medieval world, even though Seneca is this late Roman imperial writer, Stoic, right? This quote unquote Stoic, Roman Stoic, right? Was very much adapted by Christianity and medieval Christianity, and kind of made a kind of an important aspect of charitas, right? of understanding of beneficence, right? And therefore, liberality is presented as a thing. In fact, Quentin Skinner rightly argues in his short little introduction that the two targets that Machiavelli targets here in this chapter are Cicero in his De Officiis, which I think, yes, to some degree, but more so Seneca, because I would argue Seneca is much more the driving force of the kind of the civic humanist republicanism that Machiavelli is kind of mocking. This kind of this attempt at this Christian humanistic republicanism that is kind of arising at the time, in his that he's kind of looks at as folly, problematic, and this is where in light of this, there's a very good book by the guy I know. He's a Harvard professor, James Hankins, his Virtue Politics book, where he talks about the civic humanism. He's written a number of books about these Italian writers at the time, just prior to Machiavelli, Renaissance writers who are praising virtue politics, praising virtue. And Machiavelli wants to come here and say, there's something fishy about this. And this chapter is key to his attack on the attempt of virtue politics in that sense. Why? Because his argument here is, well, remember what he said in 15. We should avoid, the things that are a virtue that leads you to destruction is, in other words, and the destruction of your state is not a virtue. And a vice that secures you and secures the good of your political order and the good of your people is not really a vice. Okay? So therefore, this is a very important lesson next this chapter here about the question of liberality and parsimoniousness. And I think this is also a good question about. Oh, sorry about that. My wife interrupted us with a rescue device, something cold, some Sprite Zero. Okay, and this is the Sprite Zero Calorie, the Polish version. Okay. I'm not marketed. Sprite is not giving me any assistance. I usually like 7 Up, but when you need something to drink and it's hot like hell, and you want to like 2 bottles of water. So, But back to us. This is question of Machiavelli in this chapter gives us an introduction to the question of whether it's something giving and beneficial. These vices and this virtue really is it good? When does a virtue become destructive? Let's go right into this text. Now, this chapter, remember, this is a pain. It is basically only 4 paragraphs long in that sense, 4 Italian paragraphs. So it's not a long chapter, but it's going to get us into this. So let me begin then first with the first the qualities written above. So we're going to deal with the first quality. I say that it would be good to be reputed to be liberal. In other words, it's good to not be liberal, but to be reputed liberal. Nevertheless, liberality used in such a mode that gains you reputation for it harms you. Now, you here is interesting because the you here is clearly second person personal, okay? Both here and the next line will be that gains you, and the you here is similar to that. He doesn't change, he doesn't shift. This is personal. He's talking about to him. He's talking very intimately to the prince. He says liberality in such a mode gains you reputation for it, harms you. So, because if it is used virtuously, and in the mode one ought to use it, and that's note two. And this is a weird, again, this is one of these Machiavelli's. In other words, that this is right from Matthew, right? Again, look at is the proper giving. Now, Alvarez cites two things: Aristotle's discussion of liberality, which is the classic discussion of liberality, in book four of the Nicomachean Ethics, at 11:19a 22:11:22a 19. Go see our, if I was a better computer guy, I would have the link to the reading for that chapter there, right? Liberality, which we had three chapters, reviewed the three chapters on liberality, right? 4, I think. But what about this? What about this? What's wrong with this? He says, and also the other thing the Alvarez points to is Matthew 6, Matthew book 6, verses 2 thing about giving. The charitable giver, the one who gives, right? What is Matthew? My Bible memory is getting going. My Bible memories. I used to remember Bible by heart. As I get old, my memory gets kind of. Oh, you're not that old. Oh yeah, this is that line. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets. In other words, if you're going to give things, don't brag about it. So therefore, this real charitable giving is not. This is that famous line in Matthew, where the real giving is not that you get reputation for it. You don't do it. You don't. You give people. Actually, this is something I remember in my childhood. My father, when we used to go to out during certain times of the years, giving. He was a Mason. He was in a Masonic order, and he would be a part of the Grand Commandery, and they would visit the widows and the widows and the elderly, and usually the elderly poor at the time. This was like in the early '70s, so there was lots of elderly poor. Um, and they would bring things. Now, maybe people weren't, they were not necessarily rich. My parents weren't rich, but his organization would raise money, and they would bring, baskets, like Thanksgiving things and Christmas, and make sure that certain times of the year someone go see them and do things. Now, they often did this not bragging about it. Oh, we did this like this and this and this and this. No, they'd be ashamed to do that. This is the Christian. This was kind of the Christian metaphor. You don't see the problem with this is the liberality that the prince wants in other words, it's reputation, and therefore the question of the one who wants to be, in other words, the virtue that the Roman wants is reputation. In other words, yes, you do it, but you want the reputation for it. That even is more problematic, because that is this will harm you. He says what he says virtuously, and in the mode one ought to use it, right? It may not be recognized, and you will not escape the infamy of its opposite. In other words, being blamed for, oh, you're stingy. So therefore, if you practice the virtue of liberality in the way that Christ commands in Matthew, or the way Aristotle would command you to do it in kind of Nicomachean Ethics, it would not lead. If you did it virtuously in that sense, you would not get credit for it, and because you'd actually get the opposite. You'd be accused of being stingy. Proper liberality is giving to the right people. I mean, that's the very interesting thing about the discussion of virtue in the Nicomachean Ethics, liberality, and the Nicomachean Ethics, and then the Eudemonian Ethics, is that this is not just giving; it's the correct giving. It's not just giving things and giving people things, but rather giving them what they need when they need it, and making sure that it is good for them. Doesn't give now, in other words, what you give them is not going to be harmful for them or bad for them in that sense. So you may not get, you might actually incur the wrath of you will not escape the infamy of the opposite of not being opposite of liberal, right? For if one wishes to maintain the name of liberal among men, it is necessary that one not omit any quality of sumptuousness, to such an extent that a prince so disposed will consume all his faculties in such like works, and he will be finally necessitated, if he wishes to maintain the name of liberal, to burden the people extraordinary, to become extracting, and to do all those things that can be done to get money. In other words, in other words, the only way you get the name of liberal is to be giving, showing off your gift, liberal this, and what eventually happens is your money will go. You'll just consume. In order to have the reputation of liberality, it will consume your resources. That you'd have to what? Well, you'd have to, if you're rulers, prince, you'd have to take your people's money. You have to be getting good at getting money. In other words, this is criticism of the church, right? Alexander did all these extraordinary things in order to get money. Leo, Julius, and then later Leo would even sell indulgences, that gateways out of purgatory to heaven, right? In order, things that even Alexander, the Borgia Pope, did not do, right? He would sell. Borgia Pope would sell cardinalships, endowments of bishoprics and archbishoprics, and things like this, and other activities, and use the money to to influence his control. So he raised money and used money in a way that's harmful to. Again, he did this in the name of liberality and also power, for reputation. Same thing with Leo. Leo the Tenth, did similar kind of thing, using the greatness of the church. But and it had to, in order to have that great church, he had to go bankrupt the church, right? And also at the same time commit itself to do such rapacious techniques, right? This is what Machiavelli warns about, right? In other words, in the name of liberal, burden the people extraordinarily, to do all those things that can get money. This will begin to make him hated to his subjects and become poor. Nonetheless, none of them will respect him. And in such a mode as having harmed the many with his liberality and rewarded the few, he will feel every mischance which first arises, and he will be endangered by every danger that appears. You can understand this is actually very helps. This passage here helps you understand the origins of what happened with the beginning of the Reformation in Germany, and the role of the church, and how it lost the church and its representatives, by its need to show liberality and greatness, became rapacious towards the poor people, and it benefited. It harmed the many, but benefited the few, right? And therefore they became hated by the many. And this would be an important lesson: is that that Aristotle, Machiavelli, not Aristotle, Machiavelli is constantly said in the Prince, is a prince needs to avoid being hated, and held in contempt. And he will continue this problem here, right? So he says, therefore, the idea of being so liberal will make you, ultimately harm the many in such a way where the many will feel that they have been harmed and made taken from you. You're rapacious, not liberal, and those who will you've given will not think they would demand more from you, and you can't give it to them again. So therefore, that's going to be a backfire, right? Coming to know this and wishing to draw back, he then immediately incurs the infamy of stinginess. In other words, in other words, it's even worse that in other words, once you realize, oh, I'm in trouble, I need to hold back, then all the people that used to see, oh my God, you're stingy, oh my God, so you get the hatred. You now all of a sudden, all the good works that you did, all the benefits you tried to, all that you tried to do with your reputation is now lost because now you're perceived as being stingy, right? That's that whole point that he highlighted in there. Since a prince cannot, therefore, cannot use this virtue of liberality in such a mode as to become known for it without harm, he ought not, if he is prudent, care about the name of stinginess. For in time he will always be held to be most liberal, since his parsimony will make his income sufficient. He can defend himself from whomever makes war on him. He can undertake enterprises without burdening the people, such that he may be liberal to everyone from whom he takes nothing. And these are infinite in number. And he will be stingy to those, all those to whom he wishes not to give, and these will be few. Okay, so a great important line here. This is very important to understand it. In other words, the many just want. Remember what he said. The many, the great. Remember what he said about the difference between the many and the great. The great want to do the few great, the few ambitious, the notables. These people want to do great things or do things, but they want to. But this, in order to do these things, their ambition and their activity forces them to get the many, to force the many to do, to comply, obey, and take their resources from them. The many just want to be left alone, right? That's the whole point. Machiavelli says, Machiavelli says, leave them alone. And remember that he says that their virtue is more honest. Their claim about here is more honest than those people. Now, what he's saying here is the problem with liberality is that if you seek, it will destroy the name of it. In other words, if you try to engage and have the reputation of being liberal, a prudent prince should understand this. That no, don't. First paragraph shows what happens when you try to get the reputation of being liberal, how it destroys you. Therefore, but the prudent prince should not worry about being stingy, right? Getting the name of stingy. Why? Because he will be held to be liberal. Huh? The stingy person, why? Because he will not touch. The stingy person will not touch the. If I'm being parsimonious, I'm my parsimony. I'm dealing with my income, and I deal with my income in a way, and I am prudent with how my income is handled and how I do with it. I will be able to maintain power. I'm able to make war, defend himself and whoever makes war on me. I'm able to deal with that. I don't have to take from the people. I don't have to. What I can engage in any enterprise I might with my resources that I have access towards, and I don't have to again burden the people in that sense. And that he may be liberal to everyone whom he takes nothing. This is the metaphor. In other words, this is very Machiavelli that he's liberal because he takes nothing from everyone. He's liberal to everyone by taking nothing from them. So liberalities flip the meaning of liberality here. And that now he says what? And these are infinite in number. And he'd be stingy. So the effectiveness, in other words, his characteristic of being stingy, its effect on people is to leave the many alone. And from the many point of view, that's liberal. Being left alone, not having my money taken from me, not being forced to do things I don't need, being left to myself, left to not being commanded, or having my wealth and my resources or my time occupied by endeavors that don't really benefit me in any sense of the word, right? Whereas those who want to do these the few who want things from him now don't like him because I'm not getting what I want from you. Well, these are few. And the infinite, in other words, the many who that he takes nothing, these are infinite in number. And he will be stingy to those whom he does not give, and these will be few. In our time, we have seen great things done only by those reputed to be stingy. All the others have been extinguished. In other words, the stingy ones have been to do great. In other words, his example is the stingy one. Now we can argue that this is another thing. Pope Julius although he served the name of liberality in order to obtain the papacy, never thought of afterwards maintaining that name so that he would not be able to make war. The present King of France has waged many wars without levying an extraordinary tax on his own people. And this was possible only because of his extra expenses were covered by his long practiced parsimony. So two examples. Julius, who, although liberal to get power, once he was pope, take waging war. He was parsimony, in other words. And then the example of the King of France. King of France was able to wage war, never burden his people. Why? Because he was parsimonious with his own resources. The present King of Spain would not have undertaken or won so many enterprises had he been reputed to be liberal. In other words, Alexander, this is the great Frederick, Ferdinand the Catholic. The first King of Spain was able to achieve all his greatness. Why? Not because he's liberal, because he was parsimonious. He was careful. He handled his resources well. He maximized his capacity. In other words, if he was liberal, he would not have won so many of his enterprises. Third paragraph. A prince, therefore, in other words, a prince, therefore, ought little to esteem, in order not to have to rob his subjects, in order to be able to defend himself, in order not to become poor and despised, in order not to be forced to become rapacious, occurring the name of stinginess. So you should not, in other words, they should little esteem a prince ought to little to esteem what? In order not to rob his subjects, not to defend himself, not to be able to defend himself, in order not to become poor and despised, in order not to be forced rapacious, incurring the name of stinginess. In other words, he should little esteem fearing incurring the name of stinginess. Because this is one of those vices which enables him to reign. Remember, he said there's certain vices that must happen because you're forced, they're necessary. Here, stinginess is a vice, that something that we hold to be a vice, but is necessary in order to reign, enables him to reign. And if someone were to say, Caesar with his liberality obtained the imperium, again, this echoes Julius II obtaining the papacy. Julius Caesar, with his liberality, obtained the imperium, and many others, by being and by having held to be very liberal, have obtained to a very great rank. I respond: either you have already become a prince, or you are on the way of acquiring that rank. In the first case, liberality is harmful. In the second, it is very necessary to be reputed liberal. Now, this is important to understand. In other words, if you're already a prince, then it's harmful to be liberal. In other words, it's harmful. This liberality is harmful. In the first case, in the second, you need to be reputed to be, at least. Why? Because he says here, Caesar was one of those who had wished to obtain the principate in Rome, but after he had arrived there, had he survived and not tempered his spending, he would have destroyed that imperium. Now, that's a very important line here. Sorry, this is three note. Yeah, just as Julius Caesar. Julius dies before he can. But if he continued his spending, this would have destroyed everything. He needed to. In fact, that's the difference between him and Augustus. Augustus was very parsimonious. In other words, Augustus tended to be, he did greatness and great things, but at the same time, he was very parsimonious. That's why his reign lasted so long, and Julius's did not, right? And Julius was, killed by his friend, right? Out of fear. They would destroyed that imperium if he did this. And if someone were to reply that there had been princes who had been reputed extremely liberal, and yet they have done great things with their armies, I respond to you, either a prince spends his own or that of his subjects, or if he spends that which belongs to others. In other words, there's two things. Either a prince spend his own and that of his subjects, so his own and his subjects, that's the first case, or he spends that which belongs to others. In the first case, he ought to be frugal. So, regarding spending his own money and that of his subjects, he should be frugal. In the other, he ought not to admit any. In other words, if you're taking money from other people, you ought not to omit any part of liberality. Huh? I was going to explain this in the next the final paragraph. And anyone who knows mobsters, look at mobsters, look at criminals. They're very liberal. You always hear the stories about how the mobsters are giving and giving money out, this and that. They have to. This is the survival mechanism. This is designed that they need. This is the way they do this to protect themselves. This is not because they're being liberal. This is not because they're being truly liberal. This is the means by which they incorporate everyone into the criminal enterprise. Okay, this is they needed this. In fact, he hits it here. Let's go. And for the prince who has armies, with his armies live on plunder, sack, and ransom, who handles what belongs to others, it is necessary that he exercises liberality. Otherwise, he will not be followed by his soldiers. In other words, if you're going to be plundering, sacking, or ransom, all this stuff, criminal enterprises, if you're not liberal, you're not going to be followed. Your soldiers are not going to follow you, obey you. Otherwise, he will not be followed by his soldiers. Right? That's that whole line. That's a danger. And of that which does not belong to you or your subjects, you can be a very great giver, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander. These are the examples. Again, remember, Cyrus was the great example in the later book, early book, but uh, these are the great captains who did their liberality was because they took what belonged to others and they gave it to them, not their own subjects, but the things they conquered and took. And that could be very liberal, right? They could be very great givers, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander. And for spending what belongs to others does not take away your reputation, but it adds to it. In other words, stealing. In other words, from the point of view of taking what belongs not to you. In fact, that's what liberalism is about, right? This is the secret of New Deal liberalism. It takes from the rich and gives to those. In other words, it takes what it doesn't treat the wealthy, and these people are really as subjects. They treat them as enemies, and they're taking from their enemy. I mean, that's the Nazis. This is a great book. It's called Hitler's Benefactors by I think I forget the guy's name. He's a Hungarian author. Hitler's beneficiaries, people who Hitler wasn't opposed by most of the German people. We have to understand Hitler's Germany was not this. It was it came in democratically. Yes, it kind of did use terror to a certain degree to oppose its opposition, but it was kind of quasi last democracy. And from an Aristotelian point of view, Aristotle would say, "Hey, Hitler's regime. This is the last democracy, despotic tyranny. This kind of tyranny that you have here is a democracy, a democratic tyranny. He gets his legitimacy and support by the fact that he benefited his people. The German people were. He didn't impose anything on. The secret history of Hitler. He doesn't impose a total war economy on the Germans until August of '44. The German people aren't exposed to a total forced war economy that the Allied powers have had since the beginning of the war. Britain in 1939, 40, America 41, right? The hard post, at 42 onwards, total war economy, total limiting of domestic market. There was some constraint of domestic market in Germany, but there was no forcing women to labor. Nazis resisted that move all through 42, 43, when it could have helped them. In other words, they didn't care. That, in other words, they did not do the necessary means that because they thought that this would unduly burden the German people. And how they did was they by conquering the people that they conquered, they took first targeting Jews and the other rich. They used that money to buy support, and the same thing and as they went into other European countries, they took the resources to buy support domestically. This is what Machiavelli's talking about here. It's if you're going to be, you have to do this. You need to. If you're going to be taking from others, you need to get. This is how you get these things. You need what? He says, it adds, in other words, spending what belongs to others does not take away your reputation, but adds to it, right? It is only the spending of what is yours that truly hurts you. It's a very important thing. Only spending yours. Now, you or your subjects, right? Your subjects are yours too, in that sense. Yours, your people and your subjects. And there is nothing that consumes itself so much as liberal. Nothing. In other words, then he ends it like this. There's nothing that consumes itself so much liberality, for you lose the use the faculty of using it, all the while that you use it, and become either poor or despised, or to avoid poverty, rapacious and hated. In other words, okay, this is the danger. Liberality is interesting. Why? It is nothing that consumes itself as liberality. Why? Because once you engage in liberality, you consume your resources, and then you either and thus you become poor or despised because of it. And then when you try to avoid the poverty, poor, you become rapacious and hated. Lose lose, right? There's no win here in Machiavelli's sense. Um, Therefore, it is far wiser to have the name of stinginess, which begets an infamy without hatred, rather than to be necessitated by wanting the name of liberal to incur the name of rapacious, which begets an infamy with hatred. In other words, look at it. What is the two things? There's two goals. I want to be, if I am stingy, well, I get a, I get a, what? I get, it's an infamy without hatred. I'm not liked, it's something I'm not liked for, it's not attractive, but I'm not hated. Or, in order to become loved, or not loved, but, liberal, I have to become rapacious. I end up turning rapacious, taking things from others, and beget the name of infamy from that rapacious. That is hated. So, what's really worse? Which one is what this? Both are bad. But therefore, this is better, or at least less bad than this. This is very bad. Right? You're hated. You can't survive hatred. Being hated is it's too costly. Is the thing princes ought to avoid. So we'll stop here and we'll let you put your comments on your thing, and please put your comments down there. I hope this you get your comments and things up there. So you're doing. I'm sorry, I'm a little. I feel a little horrible. Um, I hope you. When I see the comments, I'll reply to them. If you liked the video, hit the like button. Hit the like button because it helps the algorithm. Share it. Share the video to your friends and on your social media, and share it far and wide. This will help the algorithm in this sense. Another thing is, if you've not subscribed already, please subscribing. We're getting close to the magical 500. Yay! I think we're 15 points away, 15 people away. So please encourage your friends to come check us out, check our things, go check our previous videos, check our different straits that we've dealt with. Another thing, if you can do is, okay, of course, if you didn't like this video, you can always thumbs down it, but say why in the comments so people can benefit from it. This is why we're doing this. Next, you can follow me in social media links. The social media links are below. If you want to follow me out, I'm not really that very active always. But I do, I'm more active on Facebook just because friends are there, and I always use Facebook as kind of a. But then again, I don't let everyone be my Facebook friend because it's dangerous in that sense. Because then people who snoops and spies become, yeah, he said that, he said that, he said that. I'll speak, um, I am selective, so I have a somewhat public, but not always perfectly public thing on Facebook. I'm more public in X, but I rarely do X. And I occasionally go on Gab, so that's my social media links. But follow me there. The other way you can follow me is my academic social media links below. To know more about me as a scholar and a researcher, check out my scholarship and things like that. You can check below the social media links are the URLs to this academic social media. And then last but not least, you can help contribute to this by contributing, being, everything like this help. Be a patron or sponsor. Do subscribe to our Patreon. The URLs are listed below, and you can do so. Or you can buy one of the 3 books that are listed below that I have, that I published. And that's another way you can support if you don't want to become a patron. You can order that either through your local bookstore or through an online distributor like Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or go directly to the publisher. That's that. Okay, well, I hope you have a good day and take care, and we'll turn to the next chapter, which deals with better to be loved or hated, right? Our next chapter, the infamous love or hated. Is it? Yeah, cruelty and pity, right? Cruelty and pity. Is it better to be loved or feared, right? Well, we'll stop here. We'll take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.